So then, the general goals of progressivism in the first 2 decades of the 20th century were, front and center, the goal of humanizing industrial capitalism. Now, that is not the goal of eliminating industrial capitalism, but rather of humanizing it, of recognizing the humanity, really, of the workers and recognizing them as a part of the process, not just cogs in the machine, so to speak, to empower workers. Point 3. Also, the goal was to recognize that in this new 20th century, the restrictions on freedom were going to be different than the traditional restrictions on freedom that people had faced in the country's history, which is to say, there is no more literal slavery, there is no foreign tyranny to oppose, but rather the restrictions on the freedom of individuals are going to be economic restrictions, not political ones. They are going to involve people's rights being constricted because of money. So, progressives wanted to make that known and try to do something about it. Which brings us to socialism. We've discussed before Eugene Debs and the American Socialist Party. I thought that this would be a good time to talk a little bit about this word and about the concepts that it represents, which really it's a loaded word now, and it was a loaded word then. It has come to be a sort of a boogeyman word. And again, it was at that time. That has sort of a general catch-all negativity associated with it. And has led to a lot of confusion, really. So, looking at it initially, a definition of socialism: an economic system in which the means of production are either state-owned or commonly owned and controlled cooperatively. So, means of production, industry, operated by the state or cooperatively, commonly owned. That's what they were calling for. The American Socialist Party in particular also called for these things: free college for everybody to be paid for by the government, improved working conditions, and public ownership of railroads and factories. That's something that did not happen in the United States, but did happen in some Western European countries later on. Speaking of cooperatively owned and controlled enterprises, you may or may not be aware there is an NFL football team that is commonly owned. Most NFL teams are owned by an individual or a family who have a lot of money. But one team that was established in 1919 during the Progressive Era is today commonly owned. That is to say, there is not a single person or family who controls it, but rather the people of Green Bay, Wisconsin, really own the Green Bay Packers. That is sort of a 21st century echo of progressive era ways of doing things. What is the difference between socialism and communism? That is a frequent cause of confusion. A lot of people conflate the two, use the words interchangeably as though they mean the exact same thing, and they really don't. But you can see how it's confusing. It's fair to say, I think, that socialism is somewhere in between capitalism and communism in either a socialist or communist philosophy way of looking at things. Socialism is a step toward communism. Socialists, unlike communists, don't want to take away private property. Their goal is for more people to have more private property. Communists call for a complete end to the capitalist class. Socialists call for the ability to work within a capitalist framework. Common expression that sort of defines this difference is that for communism it is each according to his ability, and then each according to his need, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. For socialism, it is from each according to his ability to each according to his deeds. That is to say, that in a socialist framework, it would be possible to, well, do well as a result of working hard or of being innovative. Now, here's something that I have found disturbing in recent years: the tendency to associate certain European countries with socialism and present that as something that is completely bad. You know, we don't want America invaded by this terrible European socialism, to the extent that last couple of years I've taken informal polls of my classes, and I've often found that sometimes by a margin of 3-1, students think that the Nordic countries of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, and Finland were allies of the Soviet Union during the Cold War, when in reality the opposite is true. Those countries who practice social democracy were opposed to communism and opposed to the communist Soviet bloc, and were allies of the United States. In fact, that way of administering a government, known as social democracy, particularly the way it's done in those countries in what is called the Nordic model, because those are the Nordic countries. About a year or so ago, there was a survey conducted in the United States of U.S. citizens who were given descriptions of several different governmental systems without being given the names of the systems or being told where they were operated, just from a description of how the governments worked. And something like almost 3/4 of the respondents chose the Nordic model as the most fair model of government. Just to sort of give you a frame of reference. In the United States, if you're a doctor, let's say that you're up here on the economic scale. If you're a janitor, you're down here. In the Nordic model, it's still possible to get rich, and if you're a doctor, you make more money than most other professions, but instead of being up here, you're here, and the janitors are here instead of all the way at the bottom. So don't be confused when we discuss socialism and think that it is the same thing as communism, although in a lot of cases, especially during this time period, there were a lot of close associations.